Order. We continue with the Buckinghamshire County Council and South Bucks District Council.
Thank you very much, Mr. Unsworth is sitting to my right, and if slide A1057 could be put up, A1057 brackets 1, we can flick to that and then flick to 105. It simply provides the introduction then to 10572 so that Mr. Unsworth to my right can introduce himself.
That's good evening. My name is Jerry Unsworth and I'm a Chartered Town Planner, and I also have a diploma in Design in the Built Environment with distinction. I've got some 38 years of broad planning experience across a range of planning work, most of which has been with 5 district and city councils in the southern half of England. Until January last year, I was Head of Planning and Sustainability for Wycombe District Council. That's a district that adjoins South Bucks, and I was closely involved there with a number of major projects, including a £275 million council-led town centre redevelopment project. I now operate as an independent planning consultant for a mix of public and private sector clients, and as well as my part-time work with South Bucks District Council, I am retained as a planning advisor to the District Councils Network. That is the umbrella body for the 200 district councils in England and a special interest group within the Local Government Association.
And then if we look at 10573, please, you record the evidence being given for, and the list is there set out in collaboration with the list there set out. And we can go straight from that, unless there's anything that's necessary to be said on that, to 10574, which shows the capital meeting the countryside. And I suspect we can go then straight to the question 10575, what do we need to think about?
Yes, in terms of these issues and the viaduct, we suggest we certainly need to think about its design, how important that design will be, and why we need the best possible outcome, and clearly whether the present assurances are adequate in that regard.
And then 1057 bracket 6, please. There you pose the question, what's the solution to the matter that we're thinking about? And you record that as an international design competition for an internationally important viaduct. Is there anything to add to that orally?
I think well, that clear. It's a simple ask, this one. There's no sort of different angles to it. It's a simple design competition is what we consider is required in this situation, and we think that is a mechanism to respond to the sensitivity of the Colne Valley and would give the best opportunity to enhance the locality. I think it's worth reiterating points that have been made earlier that the District Council and its partners support the principle of a tunnel, which we'll be hearing about later. And of course, if you agree to that, then this competition approach for a viaduct wouldn't be required. Probably stating the obvious, but needs to be said.
Then 10577, please. We've seen this picture before, and you've identified some key points here. 3.4 kilometres, more than 2 miles in terms of a viaduct. Is that the longest on the HS2 route? Longest in England?
Certainly from our research, it's the longest in the UK, yes.
Colne Valley Regional Park, edge of metropolis, we've seen these matters, landscape character, critical nature and recreational resource, and ecological and heritage interest of national importance. I suspect we can go straight on, can we, to the context continued 10578.
Yeah, I think there's probably one point I would like to just say that there is the existing characteristics of the area, but I think it's also an area that we need to think about the potential that it's got looking into the future as a landscape and recreation and heritage resource.
So in this question of context, we've asked ourselves what do we need to think about, we've asked ourselves what's the solution, and you come to what does national policy tell us?
Yes, I think the context which we've heard on the edge of London is important because it is an area of greenbelt, and greenbelt has certain purposes and functions, and our enthusiasm for that area is not just a local thing, it is enshrined in government policy. And as the Parliament is taking on the role of the local planning authority in establishing the principle of the scheme, it's important to reflect on what the National Planning Policy Framework says. So I'll just read this extract, which is that local planning authorities should plan positively to enhance the beneficial use, such as looking for opportunities to provide access, to provide opportunities for outdoor sport and recreation, to retain and enhance landscapes, visual amenity and biodiversity, or to improve damage from derelict land. And I think this is a policy context that is important for the consideration, as I was mentioning before, not just how it is now, but the potential that the area has looking into the future.
And then 10579, please.
Yes, and returning to the local context, we see the environmental statement recognises the dominant role that the corridors of open space, waterways and lakes play in the landscape in creating a sense of isolation. We see this as a real asset of the area, which the viaduct will fundamentally affect.
And then 105.7.10.
And again, in the environmental statement, the condition tranquility, and that's something I'll return to later, the regional value of the landscape means that this area has a high sensitivity to change.
And that quotation comes from?
That is straight from the environmental statement.
And the preceding ones were also from the environmental statement?
They are, yes.
And then 105.7.11, please. You ask yourself another question. Should we be concerned? And you give an answer.
And that answer really highlights the special characteristics of this area, which you've had rehearsed by Stuart Pomeroy earlier, but it is worth reflecting on the sort of coincidence of these things in this area, and it is something that it's important to highlight. This is not a degraded landscape. It may be a landscape that is in need of some improvement, but it's a landscape with some really significant assets. And
I think this slide, number 11, draws attention, which hasn't been drawn before, to the Grade 1 building complex.
It does, and I'll mention that in a little more detail in a moment.
Number 12, please.
And all of these assets we consider are affected by the viaduct.
So you ask and answer that question, and then you show the answer diagrammatically, 105.7.13.
Yes, here just really highlight those examples of where the impact occurs, and I won't go through each one as Stuart Pomeroy has done this himself, but you can see the coexistence of a lot of important recreational activities, conservation area around the Grand Union Canal, and the SSSIs and all the recreational activities going on there. But I would like to turn to the specific issue of Savey Farm, and with reference to that, I would draw attention to my supporting references document, which has got reference A1058, pages 5 and 6. And in that, I highlight on the first few pages here the listed building, sorry, not the first few pages, the pages 5 and 6, extracts from listed building guidance. And I think the significance of this is in that a Grade 1 listed building has the highest level of protection in the country. It is a category where the setting is important, and we need to take opportunities to seek enhancements, not just the status quo, when dealing with developments that affect their setting. And you may recall that there was evidence given by Sally Cakebread, the resident at Savey Farm, on 11th of March in the afternoon, and looking at the transcript from that day, paragraphs 393 and 403, which were on pages 58 and 59, it's worth reminding ourselves what was said in answer to the points raised by Sally Capebraid by Mr Mould. And this included the comments that the viaduct, and to quote, will detract from its setting and will have a major adverse effect on its significance as an historic asset. Now, as I say, Grade 1 listed building is top of the tree as far as listed building concerns, and Mr Mould went on to say that there is unlikely to be anything further that can be done, given the sensitivity of this building, to mitigate the noise effects. And I think this highlights the dilemma that you face, but the need, we say, for the extra effort to be made on the design front.
Thank you. If we go then back to the earlier sequence of slides and go to 105714, where you ask the question to which, in fact, you've already given the answer or given an answer via some of the materials which you've referred, as to will it be a substantial feature with impact on the landscape? Yes. And that takes us then on to 105715.
This is really just to remind ourselves of the significance of the viaduct, which is highlighted in this slide, taken from the environmental statement.
And then 5716, please. Here you ask some other questions. First, what about peace and quiet?
Yes, and again we see the environmental statement acknowledges here that the scheme will reduce the sense of isolation and tranquility in the valley.
And you ask whether peace and quiet is important.
And we consider that it is important, and it's one of the assets of the area that people come to enjoy, as Stuart Pomeroy outlined earlier on.
And if we go to 105717, we touch upon a matter which has been spoken to in passing already, but may be thought to demonstrate why peace and tranquility is of some significance, it being controlled here by controls on the use of water skiing via planning permission. Can you help further the committee on that matter?
Yes, it's an issue rather like it was raised by Mr Bellingham earlier. When I started looking at this, I thought water ski not a terribly friendly activity within an SSSI, but actually when you delve into it, there are a lot of controls imposed on this to protect the environment, and there was an appeal decision, it goes back to 1999, and interestingly the appeal was not on the impact on the green belt or the natural environment, it was about highway issues, but the inspector nevertheless addressed the important issues, SSSI and the green belt, and he also considered agreements that had been put forward, and he concluded that there was actually a net benefit to the environment from this proposal because of the particular set of measures to protect the ecology, the SSI, but also controls on the type of boats that were used within board LPG boats. And I just highlight this because it is an area that has been subject to careful management and control to ensure that the qualities of the area are protected for the future.
Thank you. And then 105718 speaks as to tranquility.
Yes. Now this map is not the easiest to follow in terms of the detail, but it's really to convey a picture which is one of recognising that the tranquility is a relative thing, and that you can see on this map the main area of northwest London, and you can see a sort of a circle around the area where the viaduct is. You can see the line there. This map is actually taken from the national mapping that the CPRE does of tranquility. And the reason, in looking at this, I included it is because I think it captures the relative issue very well. And it's worth, when in their report they talk about the attention that is given to protecting areas that probably we would all think of, the remote areas of the country that you would recognise automatically as tranquil, but they go on, but they say that attention, and then to pick up the end of the second line, should not exclude a recognition of the value of areas, often much smaller in size, that are closer to the centres of population. Such areas would rate in raw and national terms a low tranquility score, but when considered in their local to regional context, they have real significance for a great many people, and I think that is very pertinent to the area that we're considering in the Colne Valley.
Then 105719, the question is asked as to why we're concerned, and here a reference is made to noise, and we can remind ourselves, of course, we're not dealing directly with all noise issues today, but you're raising this in questions of tranquility and matters of that sort. Can you help us then with 105719, please?
Yes, the slide is an extract from the environmental statement and the calculation of noise impacts, and really on this plan just added the location of some of the recreational activities which are going on in this area and which enjoy the sort of, as has been said, sense of isolation, peace and calm, and it is something that clearly in recent correspondence, the impact of the viaduct in terms of noise, the HS2 is clearly moving towards a position of assuring greater mitigation, and that in principle is welcome, and I'm not here to become embroiled in the details of this, as I'm not a noise expert, and noise will be addressed later on in your hearings. But the two key points I would like to just make in relation to this is that we believe that value needs to be attached to the relative tranquility of the Colne Valley as a recreational and natural area, and an area of national heritage interest. And noise is a factor that needs to be borne in mind, not just in terms of residential activity, but from the listed building, the environment that building has. And then the inclusion of noise barriers, whilst welcome in their own right, heighten literally the importance of achieving an excellent design in terms of appearance. And the latest information from HS2 is that we will have an indication of barrier heights varying between 1.5 and 4 metres in height along this section in different parts. And I think we need to start thinking ahead as to the design implications of this and what this structure could look like. We would say that dealing with noise and dealing with the design and appearance of the viaduct are not issues that are mutually exclusive. They need to be looked at together.
Well, then 105720 asks and answers in a simple affirmative way, 105720, whether more can be done to address wider noise issues. And you then go on 105721 to pose the question, what could happen?
Yes, and we're not suggesting that these are designs that HS2 are envisaging, but they are examples, and we think that we must do better. The Taiwan example here looks as if it's probably been sponsored by the Concrete Association of Taiwan. It's a rather heavyweight appearance, but the point is, as we are at this point in the process, we have a really important issue to consider in terms of this structure, how it will relate to the special character of the Colne Valley.
And the Medway viaducts, they carry HS1, do they?
They do. This is the HS1.
So then you go on 105722. You've already asked the question whether more can be done to address wider noise issues. You then go on to ask the question, can something be done about this?
And we believe it can.
And then if we go on to ask some more questions, please, 105723.
So we are not confident that as things stand that this will not be an intrusive feature in the Colne Valley, and we believe that the assurances offered as things stand are not adequate to give us the confidence as to what structure will emerge.
Yes, and then you...
Just worth giving your help to us. The word intrusive, how is that different from the word noticeable?
I would say something that is intrusive is not pleasing to the eye, it's not an experience that you would enjoy, whereas noticeable is something you can see. And I think that does unearth what lies at the heart of this, that we believe that if there is to be a viaduct, there is an opportunity here to have something that is actually a credit to the area, that people say, look, this is a really cracking piece of design, and can actually become a tourist attraction, perhaps even.
So the Sydney Opera House equivalent to, alternative to the Taiwanese viaduct.
Yeah, and bridges can achieve that.
So the Houses of Parliament would be regarded as noticeable and desirable to be noticed, but not intrusive.
Certainly that would be the view.
Except in the Colne.
From the inside.
Well, then, if we look on, please, to 105724.
Yeah, so we'll turn now to the assurances that have been offered, and we've had considerable exchanges around this, and the information papers D1, G6, the design panel and the design vision are all referred to, and we do welcome these as statements, and they are worthy words, so to speak. But I think the issue is that collectively they leave much open to interpretation, and the design panel itself has not got terms of reference yet, and we are in the in considering this, where the environmental statement has said that they consider no other mitigation measures are considered practicable. But we do think that more can be done to achieve a structure that we're proud of here. We've had two key letters. First one really was on the 24th of March, and within that letter it did say that viaducts will be part of a broader geographical package, and separating a single structure from this overall approach would pose significant risks to the project in terms of safety, aesthetics, cost and programme. And we have not understood or had it explained to us quite what those problems are. And I think it's important, this point about being part of a broader geographical package and how the design consideration gets caught up in a wider issue.
Well, then, if we go to the next slide, please, 25, the 1st of June letter, which elaborates on general assurances and noise measures, and you record that the promoter remains of the view that an international design competition may be possible, but it's not a decision that it wishes to take at this time.
Yeah, so in a sense, the concern that was expressed in the previous letter about significant risks, missing out a few words, but to the programme, appears not to be something that is really being argued. That they're saying it may be possible, but they don't wish to take the decision. So you then come to that this could lead, or go back to the previous letter. It would leave you with concerns about safety, aesthetics, and cost, and we're not quite getting what the problem is.
Well, then 26, please, 105726. This is a continuation by reference to the letter, with the challenge to be clearer on, and you've identified for the Colne Valley what is sought.
Yes, so this is a challenge set out in that letter of the 1st of June, and we think what we're after is very simple, really, and it is to seek the best possible aesthetic appearance, which produces a legacy we'll be proud of, the best possible noise mitigation, which we would say is to also protect the recreational as well as residential and other receptors, and it's also a viaduct that is the best possible in terms of environmental sensitivity. And we've heard earlier from Dr. Thornhill about some issues which do interact with the design of the viaduct. So we've got quite a complex set of issues that viaduct will have to address. But what our concern is, in terms of design objectives, is the best possible that we can achieve in these areas, and to find the technique that leads to that.
105.727 asks that question, does it? What do we need to achieve this?
And this is where we conclude that an international design competition is the technique to achieve that, and we think it's justified by the sheer scale of this structure, over 2 miles long, the complex issues that are being addressed in the Colne Valley, but I think it's that role that the Colne Valley needs to perform in providing this outdoor resource for Londoners, and we are looking at a viaduct that will be here for a long time, a legacy for London, the country, and a symbol of our nation. So we think there are compelling reasons to require excellence in design, and a design that as far as we can, enhances the area.
105.728, please. Here you're indicating international design competition as the solution, and you're referring to certain matters, signifying this is not merely, so to speak, an idea of your own, but derived from sources.
Yes, and these are reputable organisations, the Royal Institute of British Architects and the International Association for Bridge and Structural Engineering, and they've done very recent reports which look at the specific issue of design competitions, and the RIBA one has sort of 2 daughter documents, both produced in 2012, which are very pertinent, and the full of references to those are in the supporting references document A1058, which we don't need to turn to, but I'll just point you to those.
Can I ask, given your experience over 30, 40 years, what would be the cost of having a design competition? I mean, presumably you'd have a number of people put in designs, they'd all have to be paid for designs, and then you'd use the one which would perceive to be the best.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea of costs, given your experience?
Well, not from my own direct experience here, but it is something that's addressed in the reports that I'm referring to, and they pose two points really. One is that it is a minimal amount in the grand scheme of what is under consideration, that often they will identify designs that actually can save money, and the report, which is, as I mentioned, one of the daughter documents of the RIBA report produced in 2012, which is Design Competitions Guidance for Clients, does look at the cost issue and identifies that as in project values over 10 million. It says it may be 0.5% to 0.09%. So that's the best indication I can give you. But all these things have been analysed in these sort of research documents.
Thank you. And then if we could look at the next slide, please, number 29. And here you quote some advice which has been tendered.
Yeah, so these are from the two reports, and again, they are advancing competitions as a technique to reduce effort, resource, promote good design, give more choice, and give architects more opportunities. And I think the Bridge Engineers report of 2013 highlights that if a promoter is looking for high quality design, they want to demonstrate concern for quality of the public realm, they want public involvement in the process, then they commend the competition route. And the RIBA have identified that of 57% of the built projects from RIBA competitions went on to win awards for outstanding architecture. So they've actually looked at the way, as a technique, this leads to something that is regarded nationally as outstanding products. And this is what we're concerned about here, is what is the route to achieve that excellent product.
Then, slide.
43% of RIBA competitions didn't lead to RIBA awards. I mean, you know, these are REBA competitions and REBA awards, so it's not exactly an outstanding statistic from that perspective. You do what mainly saying. So.
Well, I'm quoting from their report, and they identify it as something that highlights that a very large proportion of those win awards. Yeah. Obviously, not everything can win an award, but it's a good reflection on the process.
I just wonder who else RIBA would give awards to, but actually competitors in their own competitions.
I'll tell you.
And then 105730, please.
Yeah, so these reports again look at how across the world, some of the structures that we may get to know have come about, and the Millau Viaduct, the Gateshead Millennium Bridge, both.
It was a very good argument. I was making.
Threw that one in just for you. But the important thing is these have come out of the competition process, and they are they are features that actually become attractions in their own right, and that's something that we think we've got an opportunity here in the Colne Valley to achieve the same thing. And there's a lot of very good quotes, particularly in the RIBA 2012 report on guidance for clients, the design competitions guidance for clients document. That gives a lot of reflections on people who've been involved in this, why they did it, and the results that come from it. But I think it's, you can see here one of the quotes: for a client, a competition by its very nature drives up quality, stimulating creativity and innovation, and gives a wide range of new ideas, improving choice. And so this we think is very applicable in this instance. And the Structural Engineers Report of 2013 again pointed out that by their very nature, design competitions encourage creativity and innovation and help a client to select a design that meets his particular needs. So, we think there's a body of work here that gives us confidence that this is the right sort of technique to use when you're dealing with a piece of kit like this.
Well, then 31, please, where you refer to the ability to generate innovative ideas, and you're drawing attention here particularly to what?
Well, certainly not to the specifics of the diagram. It's just really to highlight that we see a competition as opening up the issue to invite a range of innovative ideas that choices can be made from. And we see that there's the challenges I outlined before about noise, about the environment, bring something very, very special to bear, and we just think that this, as a technique, would produce a range of interesting ideas that decisions can be made from.
And then 32, please.
So, I'm sure, in terms of asking why a competition, what difference would it make from the procurement that is being recommended? And we see these characteristics here of a competition as being the vehicle that would best ensure a discrete focus. And I think this is an important point, goes back to the wider geographical area that was referred to at an earlier letter. I think it's a way of generating alternatives to choose from. Involvement and consultation happens connected as part of that. And also, we see that this is a technique that would be very suited to the skills of the design panel that is going to be established. That could be very much part of this competition process, and it is about being proactive rather than the community and the local authorities being reactive to a scheme and trying to improve a design that may come forward.
I just want to get clear here, if I may, the procurement which is being recommended, i.e. the HS2 procurement, contrasted with the competition which you're providing for or suggesting. The procurement which is recommended, is that procurement of the viaduct or procurement of a longer length of track to include the viaduct?
Well, we don't have any definitive information on this as yet, but if I go back to that letter from the 24th of March, where they say the viaducts will be part of a broader geographical package, and it hasn't been defined what the extent of that geographical package would be, but that is a particular concern because we don't know. And design of the viaduct, I think undoubtedly would get caught up in a number of other issues.
Then 33, please.
So we're suggesting that the competition is a technique to generate excellence and options to choose from. We believe that there is a window that can be used to include this in the project programme, and the letter from HS2 suggests that that is the case. And so we would see the next stages, if this was agreed, is clearly devising the brief, addressing all of the issues that there are to be addressed, and establishing some sort of steering group that would bring in local involvement, but centrally involving the design panel and the community and the local bodies representing this area. And just to remind ourselves that this is a structure that those living and using the Colne Valley will see, but not the travellers who will be on the railway itself.
Yes, and then running towards the conclusion of your examination in chief, 34, the way forward.
So I think this really coming to the end of what I've got to say here, and just to remind ourselves of the planning policy statement issued in 2012 highlights that planning and exercises like this should not just be about scrutiny, but it should be a creative exercise, finding ways to enhance and improve the places in which we live our lives, and this is what we are hoping for the Colne Valley, and we see that the competition is the local interpretation of that.
Yes, and then I think with 35 you ask whether the committee can help, to which you provide an answer, and then at 36 you simply thank, I think, the committee and have a picture of the Ribblehead Viaduct.
Yeah, not suggesting it's a suitable design or anything, but it's just a nice one to put on the last slide.
Yes.
Everybody who signed a petition to say that had gone on the train, it would have been a profitable line.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. So that concludes the examination.
Mr. Mould?
Yes, can we just put up P61432, please? This is the second page of the letter of the 1st of June, which Mr. Unsworth, you touched on briefly. Just by way of preface to this question, you told the committee a few minutes ago that you were particularly concerned that the project should deploy a procurement technique that produced the highest quality aesthetic appearance, noise performance, and environmental sensitivity of the viaduct in the Colne Valley. Railway is not in a tunnel. Yes. I just draw attention to this letter. Can you see it on the screen?
I'm looking at the hard copy here.
If I can just be forgiven, just reading out a couple of paragraphs. If you start towards the bottom of the page, there's a paragraph which begins based on current timetable assumptions. And it says this: based on current timetable assumptions, the promoter is likely to start the process of procuring the design and construction team for the railway and associated works in 2016. As part of the procurement process, there will be 3 key stages where the essential design credentials and requirements of any contractor will be specified and scrutinised. These are firstly the pre-qualifying questionnaire stage, secondly the invitation to tender stage, and thirdly the tender evaluation stage. With the appointment of the chair of the design panel and the establishment of the design panel itself, the chair being Sadie Morgan, the outgoing chair of the Architects Association, with the appointment of the chair and the establishment of the design panel, the promoter has shown its commitment to embedding good design at the heart of all it does. The terms of reference for the design panel, which are due to be published shortly, are likely to identify that the design panel will have a role in scrutinising how design requirements are incorporated into the key stages of the procurement of our contracts. To this end, it's anticipated that the design panel will consider design specifications and design within the procurement process. And then it goes on to say this, and this is what I want you to just to look at. In summary, the processes that the promoter will adopt will ensure that the procurement of design will be highly competitive and will undoubtedly attract the best designers and design teams in the world. The promoter therefore does not consider that there would be any requirement to have a separate international design competition for the Colne Valley Viaduct, nor does it consider that this process will deliver any better design outcomes that could be achieved by the processes it intends to employ. Now, I think probably it's slightly overdoing it to say will undoubtedly attract, because perhaps that would be better expressed as are intended to attract the best designers and designers in the world. So that's the procurement route that is proposed. I just wanted to know, in that last paragraph I've read out in particular, it'd be helpful, I think, to all of us if you could just say what it is that an international design competition would bring, which that process, which I've just read out to you, doesn't bring, to the output, which is a design for the Colne Valley Viaduct that combines aesthetic appearance, noise, performance, and environmental sensitivity. What is it you get from the international competition that you don't get from what we have said we intend to do? Fine.
Right. I think that the first thing is, going back to this geographical coverage point, is that we don't have any indication in this process of what geographical area would be under consideration, what other issues will be under consideration as part of that procurement process. So I think that's a very, very important thing, in that we would say that this as a structure is worth pulling out and dealing with in its own right. And I think it's also then the way in which that procurement process, and we have had discussions with HS2 about this, would in itself involve public consultation. And my understanding is that there wouldn't be public consultation on this particular procurement process, but there would be from the firm, the consortium that would be appointed at the end of this would come up with a design which would then be subject to consultation. And we did, as I say, have conversations about that. So I think there's the key thing is how the public and how the local authorities can engage in the design process. And I think this is at the again something that is repeated in correspondence we've had about to emphasise the opportunity that the authority will have to negotiate on the design. But I think when we are talking about something of this ilk, to negotiate changes to a design, we would suggest is not the best way of achieving an excellent outcome, that it is better to have consultation engagement on a process that involves a range of options that get narrowed down. And I think that there are skills that could be brought to bear on that, and that we think is a better way of engaging people than actually engaging on the product of a design that has itself resulted from a procurement process.
Okay. Can I just ask a couple of follow-ups on that? On the geographical area, I mean, clearly no one would suggest that we should be compromising on the design unreasonably anywhere along the route. We should be aspiring to good quality design throughout the length of the railway, shouldn't we? But clearly the Colne Valley, you nodded affirmatively to that question, clearly the Colne Valley Viaduct is a particular feature, a key design element, you might say. And your point really comes to this, I think. You say ideally you would like to see whatever procurement technique is followed, singling out the Colne Valley Viaduct as a particular feature that deserves the closest attention.
Yes,
that's your principle.
That's the principle, and I think takes heed of advice that we've identified in these documents that I've referred to in our reference documents that say how do you achieve that outcome, and that a competition process, which I think is a different type of competition from the competition within the procurement that's envisaged here, how the public would engage in that. I think that they are slightly different beasts.
Can I just then come to that second point, which is about public consultation? You seem to envisage that as part of the competition, those who participate as competitors would each engage in some form of public consultation on their emerging bid. So supposing you had 5 or 6 separate competitors putting together bids for the Colne Valley Viaduct contract, that as part of that process they would go out to public consultation. That seems to be what you're envisaging, isn't it?
No, it's not. I don't see it working like that. And again, there is advice. There's plenty of advice on how this could be managed, but I think that would be more done as a collective consultation as to the outcomes of the invitation to submit schemes to the competition. And there are all sorts of different ways in which this can be managed, but I think it would be done as a composite consultation before decisions are made, either on a long list or on a short list, or on both.
I mean, I'm certainly not aware of it being the norm that international design competitions, that whilst the competition is ongoing, that the bids that are proposed are subjected to public consultation. They're subjected to the scrutiny of a jury or whoever it is who's going to make the decision. But they don't involve public consultation in the sense that you've outlined, do they typically?
Well, they certainly can.
They can? But have you any experience of any that have?
Well,
it sounds rather unwieldy.
Well, I don't think so. I think it's the stage at which it is done, how it is managed, and it is again in the RIBA reports it highlights that it actually is the competition and engagement in the competition by the public is a way of stimulating interest, of engaging people. It is one of the best ways of doing it.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I'm not sure actually you're very much far apart, because I mean throughout the whole process the issue of design has been raised at various points for the obvious reason that you said. It's local people that look at the bridges and look at the viaducts in their particular area, and HS2 has been alive to that as we've gone along, and certainly the input of local authorities is pretty important. And of course every time we look at any promotional literature it has the computer generated image of a railway going over the particular area that we're talking about today. So clearly it wouldn't be an area picked for a particularly bad design. But I think certainly there's some food for thought here, which we're going to have to think about as we go forward. Do you any redirect questions?
Just a couple of questions, if I may, by re-examination. Could we put up 105730 again, please? And this touches upon the question asked about involvement of the public in an international design competition. And here you've given, on 105730, a couple of illustrations, I think that's right.
Yes.
And the top left one, please, and the quotation from that.
Which is connected to the Midlands Viaduct, and in this instance they identified that the project from, as they said, from the administration would not have been accepted, and that these things are fought against, and they say the best way was to have a competition as the public accepts the decision of a jury.
And can the jury involve the public if it wishes to do so?
It can, and it is actually recommended in the RIBA report.
Thank you. And I just want to ask one further question, if I may. You were asked questions by reference to the letter of 1 June 2015, P6143 brackets 1 and in particular brackets 2, 61432. And here, under a heading on 61432, we see reference to competitive procurement and assuring quality of design. And you were asked questions to the effect, well, part and parcel of the procurement of the railway will involve design. Help the committee, if you will, please, as to the extent to which you are seeing design as part of, necessarily part of procurement of the railway, or something which stands separate from that.
I'd answer it that it is both, really, that design, I'm not doubting that design would be a serious consideration in the wider procurement process. But the wider that procurement process is and the wider the issues are that are under consideration, the more it becomes questionable the attention that could be given to the specifics of design for this viaduct. And I think what we're saying is that you do need to have a focus on the design of the viaduct as a discrete exercise which a competition would give it. So hopefully you understand the point I'm making there.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir.
Sir Peter?
This is rather more for the promoters than it is for you, but forgive me, hitchhiking. And it may be a question, or part of a series of questions, which would go properly to one of your own witnesses. On that page we were looking at just now, on 61432, the process are going to get the team to do the design and development. Do we understand from that that the viaduct is likely to be a contract? And if so, is it likely to be designed by outsiders or by insiders?
I'll ask Mr. Miller to comment on that. I think rather than trying to explain it myself, it better comes from him, I think. Yeah.
And the other thing which may also be useful to sort of note is that in one of the things you read, we had a quotation from the promoters that viaducts were part of a broader geographical package. That could mean almost anything. We hope, I would hope, that the viaduct in the Colne Valley is not necessarily going to look as though it's part of a family with some structure in North Warwickshire.
Again, should we touch on that when Mr. Miller gives his evidence? Yeah.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you very much. So can I just, at this moment, draw attention to the fact that, on my understanding, agreement has been reached as far as Ancient Woodlands is concerned in relation to a particular assurance which has been given. And as far as other matters under discussion which took place in the adjournment of this committee, I'm not sure what the precise position has been reached in connection with matters which bore upon transport. This is for you to say.
Do you want a minute or two, Mr.
It may be sensible, sir, if that's...
I adjourn for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Order. Committee come to order, please. Mr. Straker, do you feel confident in telling us what has been agreed?
Yes, sir. I hope I feel confident in telling you what's agreed. And I'm going to revert to the point about the woodlands, because there was a matter there in which I spoke shortly before you adjourned and didn't give the full picture. As far as the woodlands is concerned, agreement has been reached on ancient woodlands. The assurance contained in relation to Pinnock's Wood is as agreed as set out in HS2's letter of today's date. And the assurance relating to Battlesford Wood has been altered and is as follows, namely that the Secretary of State will require the nominated undertaker to use reasonable endeavours to reduce the physical impacts of construction of the railway and ancillary works upon ancient woodland located at Battlesford Wood, as shown in an identified drawing, such that no more than 0.1 hectare of the ancient woodland area is physically, I think that should be affected by the construction works, and to implement the scheme of mitigation that is shown in relation to Battlesford Wood in the environmental statement and described on a particular drawing in the Colne Valley so far as reasonably practicable, and in any event not to reduce the area, type and quality of the landscape planting provided. And HS2 will send to Buckinghamshire a revised version of the letter with those amendments to which I've referred. As far as the M25 and traffic measures are concerned, which it was to be the province of my next witness, the position is as follows. Agreement is very close to being reached on the issue of the M25 slip roads. A letter was received today with assurances about when those slip roads will be operational. Further detailed discussion is required on when the slip roads will cease to be used. On additional traffic signalling measures, detailed need to be settled on the involvement of the Council in the production of traffic assessments and on the undertaking of payments to be made to the County Council should signalling measures be required. If any difficulties emerge in connection with those matters, the right to return to the committee later has been reserved, but the expectation is, certainly the hope is, that that will not be necessary.
Okay. Mr. Mould?
No, thank you very much.
You're happy with that?
Yes, thank you.
So, okay, that essentially trenchless cables, is it?
I think the ducts are in place. It's what we come to call passive provision, I think, probably. Yes. Being put in by the County Council or by someone at their behest, I think, yes.
Well, at some stage someone will tell us.
Yes.
Just so we know. I'm glad you agree. We'd like to know what it is.
Oh! Were we at cross purposes? Were you talking about the highways?
No, the cables in the woodland.
Oh, I see. I'm so sorry. I was on highways.
Moles going through and dragging cables with them, but they've got.
We have to pull some. We have to put some cables, but they're reported in the environmental statement as being subterranean. Yes.
So I take it then we do not have your last witness.
That is right, sir.
You're
with your leave.
just about there, subject to wording and what has been the assurances given.
So that's absolutely right. And so with your leave, I don't propose then to call the fourth witness.
Poor fellow, been sitting here all day for his day. Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you,
I'm
sir.
glad that our occasional Germans has generated some degree of agreement. And thank you very much, Mr. Unsworth. Mr. Mould, do you have any response to...
If I may, I'm going to ask Mr. Miller just to comment on one or 2 points.
All right.
Good evening. Okay. He's used to having a pricked neck. So
I know.
can't wait to start again. Mr. Miller, I wonder if we can deal just turn to some of the ecological points that were raised earlier, and then come to design and master planning. So if we perhaps put up P6113, which the committee was showing a little bit earlier. The committee will recall this shows the mitigation works that are within the build scheme to mitigate, compensate for impacts on ecology and wildlife interests in the vicinity of the council's area, which is broadly speaking to the south of Broadwater Lake. And I think what you wanted to do was to use this as a prompt, in particular Battlesford Wood as a prompt, to explain the process that the project will follow in mitigating, and with a view to culminating in approved designs and plans under Schedule 16 that have been properly scrutinised by the responsible authorities and considered by others who have a stake in that.
That's right. It's very useful that we just got through that assurance about the ancient woodland, because I think that is a good demonstration of the environmental assessment process in action. We have an environmental statement, we've reported on significant environmental effects, and there are changes sort of in the offing through this process. And where this has taken to us with Battlesford Wood is we've reduced the area of ancient woodland that's actually affected from 1 hectare to, we think, around about 0.1 of a hectare, but using reasonable endeavours it might be either side of that figure. But there's a significant reduction. So you can see there that the progress that we've made, it reduces the environmental effect, so that's an improvement for ancient woodland, that's a key point. But also it means that we get ourselves into a better position. One of the petitioners talked about the no net loss, where actually we're having an improved position in respect of no net loss. And that, together with the woodland that we've spoken about on a previous occasion, we can see that we have a plan which is still emerging that goes some way to affording better protection and a better response for the natural environment in the Colne Valley. So that's I think, a good example of how this is improving. Clearly, at a point, we need to bring these plans forward, and what we've said all the way through the process is that the designs will be taken forward under the auspices of the planning regime of the bill, and we've mentioned on quite a number of occasions Schedule 16, and that ultimately goes to the local planning authority, a qualifying authority, the district authorities, who have responsibility to finally consent the detailed plans. And there are a variety of measures that they will look at, the finishes of the scheme, for example, and whether the scheme has been brought forward to afford the right environmental protection. So I think we're going in the right direction with the ancient woodland in that respect. If you think about the viaduct, what we've additionally done here and what we've been listening to through this process is a number of views from local people and from organisations who are here today petitioning, that the Colne Valley needs to be looked at in its own right. I would say it's not just the viaduct, I would say it's the whole range of environmental features through here that people enjoy in a whole variety of ways, and we've listened to that in recent days. All of that's got to be joined up. So somehow or other, through the procurement, we're going to have to find a way of making sure that this viaduct and the railway overall, and probably between the two tunnel portals across the valley here, or between the 2 points, Ruislip and up by the M25, we've got to have a coordinated plan that's actually going to work. Now, what we've set out is a Colne Valley panel, and that will bring to, and we've seen some evidence on that being brought up on slides. That will include the relevant local planning authorities. It will include the county authority with Bucks County Council, and it will include the likes of Natural England. So we have a really good mix here of relevant bodies who are already taking care of this valley, and that we will bring them together, and we will think about the Colne Valley as a coherent piece going forward. Now, we've talked about the design panel, and what you've heard today is, I think, going to the quality of the design of the viaduct and the railway as it passes through the Colne Valley itself. And the reason why we've got a design vision and the reason why we're going for a design panel on this project is follows probably about 4 years worth of work, largely driven out of what I've described before as the Non-Governmental Organisation Forum and the Ministerial Environmental Roundtable. And what that has done is got us into a place where we have then gone to the design community. And if you go to the design vision, which is on the website, I happen to have a booklet here, and if you go to the back of the booklet, you'll see that there are a wide range of people that have been brought into the process. And what we're saying is that we are embedding the quality of design within our processes and practices going forward. That's why we think that the procurement process that we've set up is appropriate. It is well informed by these people, and as Mr. Moulder has explained, with the appointment of Sadie Morgan coming on as the independent chair, we bring very high quality expertise into the frame to scrutinise these plans. Now, I think what that will mean in the Colne Valley is that the local Colne Valley panel will in some way work in parallel with the design panel going forward. And there is obviously a mutual interest in what the outcome is. But I think that the Colne Valley panel will probably be concentrating on the objectives and aims through there, and the design panel itself will be scrutinising those designs to make sure that what the team has specified, to make sure that a viaduct can actually stand up and carry a railway and the number of trains and services that we're proposing. All of those engineering requirements are married appropriately to the landscape, the sensitivity of this location that we've heard about, and that we deliver the best outcome. But that's a best outcome in a collaborative sense. And if you go to the design vision, it is very clear it is about people, place and time. And what that's talking about is a collaborative environment within which to work. And that is a superior approach. It means that we can draw people in, listen to what the design is all about. We've said in the draft assurances that, and we will talk about, we will discuss things and will enable that conversation to take place about draft designs. So I think we've got, whilst it's a different approach to an international design competition, it is a very well-rounded approach. It's been tested with the best designers, certainly in the UK. They are of international prominence, if we want comfort from an international or a world perspective. They are all listed in the back of that document. I might draw upon somebody like Professor Catherine Moore, who's the president of the International Federation of Landscape Architects, Thomas Heatherwick from the Heatherwick Studio. If you've been travelling around on a bus today, you'll realise that some of the buses are designed by him, and you will have seen the Olympic Cauldron in 2012, unique designs. So I think this has given you a flavour that we are very much of a mind to make sure that this works locally, but also we do have to be of a mind that it's got to work as an engineered range of structures along the line of the route, and it's got to be held upright to make sure that those trains work as well. So I think that's probably where I wanted to go to with that.
Can we just pick up on a couple of particular points? There were a couple of points Peter raised, and I wonder if we can just pick up those. We can go to P61432 if we can. 6143 brackets 2. This was the summary of the procurement process as set out in this letter of the 1st of June to the councils.
Yeah.
Peter had 2 points. The first question was where there's a reference to the team undertaking various things in the context of that procurement process. Are we envisaging a design coming forward as part of the project, or are we envisaging that that there will be an invitation to the world to tender, and then tenders will be evaluated when they return to in response to that invitation?
That's an invitation to the outside world.
Right. So the design will be, we expect, will be something that's undertaken externally to the project, as it were.
Yes. Yeah.
And the second question was in relation to the package. I think you touched on this in the answer you gave a few moments ago when you spoke about the need for a coherent design between the two tunnel portals. But has any decision been made as to whether the Colne Valley Viaduct should be seen as part of a larger package, or it should follow some common design approach, as it were, which is reflected in Warwickshire or Berkswell or whatever it may be? What's the approach on that?
No, there's no sort of decision on a common approach. Well, we recognise that this is a key structure, and there's no doubt about it. The length of it, it's one of the longest. Will be one of the longest structures in the UK, if not the longest. So it's clearly very important. It's going through a sensitive site. So the way that we will come about the design, it will be for the Colne Valley. So that's not to say that it won't incorporate some sort of standard components and that sort of thing, but that will be sort of more the engineering type components, I would guess. But it's as I described with the design approach, what this means is thinking about that structure as a coherent piece. I don't think you could look at the structure in its own right. You've got to look at the structure and what the railway is doing either side, and you've got to think about what is happening in the valley itself, as we've described.
Just touching on the question of the public's involvement, which was a concern that Mr. Unsworth had. You'll recall that way back last September, where the committee raised the question of public engagement in the development of design, particularly for key components, key elements of the project.
Yeah.
Is that something we have taken forward under the auspices of our design policy set out in information paper D1?
Yes.
And I think that's been dealt with already on the record in proceedings of the committee. There's two other things I'd like to ask you about briefly. I think for that purpose we can go to P6171, which I showed the committee earlier, making clear that this is where we have a consolidated list of assurances on landscape and design, which were set out in the letter of the 29th of May. Now, just make it clear, this has been superseded by the list that was set out in the letter which was sent by the project to the councils today, but I draw attention to this page. It's on the system because it encapsulates the key elements which have been developed subsequently. You've dealt with the first of them, I think, which is ongoing engagement in design. I just wanted to ask you about the question of the master. This letter.
Is it South Bucks or South Bucks?
It's to South Bucks. This was a letter of the 29th of May to South Bucks.
Yeah, I guessed that from the postcode, but I wasn't absolutely certain.
I see, didn't have it on the side. Yeah, do apologise. Yes, request for a master plan. I think the committee noticed this earlier. That reference to it being a two-way process, the nominated undertaker having regard to landscape proposals brought forward by the local planning authority or authorities during the development of the design of the railway. Mr. Mellor, do you want to just comment on that? There's been reference to a master plan. What do you say about the need for that in the light of the approach that's been assured by the project in relation to joint working, if you will?
But again, I think that the idea of forming a Colne Valley panel, bringing together those relevant authorities, statutory authorities, with us, is a superior way of working. It enables appropriate collaboration. I think the words we afford the opportunity to something along the lines of discussing mitigation and restoration schemes, and we've talked about design. So what this is about is actually getting those relevant people together to talk about that location. That's its purpose. So you don't need a master plan to have that conversation. You have that conversation through the panel. You work out what your aims and objectives are, and we've heard a little bit about that today, and you do your best to try and meet those aims and objectives.
We're not looking to prevent the local authorities, if they want to use their own planning powers, to bring forward some supplementary planning documentation responding to HS2, but we don't see that as necessary for the purposes of delivering a properly responsive project through this area.
No, we don't see it as necessary because that can be dealt with through the panel. But if the local authorities wanted to put something together themselves and formalise that, perhaps in the way that might modify local plans, then clearly that's in their jurisdiction. I know that local authorities along the line of the route have been thinking about those sorts of things in light of the landscape design response, for example.
And then finally...
in effect, if the panel were meeting and everybody in the panel said we'd like a master plan, then effectively it would happen.
Well, the panel would be the master plan, essentially.
Right.
We're all talking about the same thing at that point, at that moment in time. And so what would be recorded and what would be taken into account with designs and your plans for the landscaping and mitigation, aspirations for restoration and that sort of thing. And we talked about restoration on the west side of the Colne Valley a month or so back. So all of those sorts of things could come to a head through that panel, and that seems to me to be the right forum for making that work. You don't need to have a master plan for that and glossy documents. What you need to do is get to grips with the real issues and make some decisions about it, and that panel will inform that approach.
Thank you. And then the two other assurances here, dealing firstly with landscape principles and a reference to a landscape design approach document, and then, as we touched on briefly earlier, the reference to collaboration in relation to taking forward restoration schemes. And just wanted the committee to see some of the emerging project material in relation to that. If we turn to P6166 bracket 1, we see. Tell us what this document is.
What this is about is a further elaboration of our approach to the response that we kind of set out in terms of in environmental assessment terms as mitigation and compensation. And we are taking a route approach with this. We need to think about what is the message that we want to give our contractors and others to say how we will go about the business of landscape in this particular instance. And we've been working in the background on the landscape approach document, as the word draft says, it's in draft. And what we're trying to do is think about what is the response along the line of the route. And broadly what that means is a response to the landscape design which is proportionate to the sensitivities of each location along the line of the route. And I think we've seen a little bit of that along the line of the route. Up at Worm Leighton, we know that that's an attractive landscape, and that will have to be treated in a certain way. Up at Hints, we've looked at that landscape, and that will be treated in a certain way. And we've had this discussion all the way along the route. So here is no different. And through the Colne Valley, we will be thinking about the landscape design and all of the design elements which need to be accounted for through the Colne Valley. And what this document will do is help bring all of those elements together that designers then can take up. They can think about all the objectives and aims that are discussed through the panel, take all of that into account, having had that local discussion, and then be able to respond in the detail.
And if we just switch through to page 18 of this series, if we can, P616618. I draw attention to this page because it sets out the method in this emerging document, and it's a familiar approach to designing a major scheme such as this into the landscape in which it's going to sit, so that it's properly responsive to the character and appearance of that landscape. You see the staged approach. Is that put it colloquially, standard stuff?
It is, and this document has, I suppose, in a way, been a bit of a pilot for the pool of design panel members that we expect to bring to bear for these sorts of documents and approaches. And so Catherine Moore, who I mentioned earlier, was looking at this document amongst a number of notable landscape architects also mentioned in this document, working alongside our internal team to think about what the approach to landscape design is all about. And Sadie Morgan was an observer in taking this process and practice forward. You are right, this is fairly standard practice, and we talk about national character areas for landscape, and that is something that Natural England have been promoting, and there is recognised practice behind that. And then that practice encourages local planning authorities to produce local landscape character areas, and that's done in consultation with a whole wide range of people. And in fact, through the Chilterns area, probably about 4, maybe even 5 years ago now, Bucks County Council looked very carefully at bringing forward the landscape character areas alongside the line of the HS2 route as it was published at the time. So in Bucks there are a number of landscape character areas which already help us with clues as to the sensitivity of the location, matters like the setting and that sort of thing that was talked about a little earlier on about listed buildings, what the ecology is all about, and how this changes even through Bucks. And we know that Colne Valley is one type of landscape. It sits alongside the area of outstanding natural beauty, which is different. The Aylesbury Vale is different. And so these various sort of landscape character areas will help inform the design and ultimately our response to the landscape. And what I've talked about in past sessions is about how the railway will ultimately fit into the grain of the landscape. Well, this is it. This is the way it will be carried out. And that means that we are responding to the way that local people have been consulted upon and how their area works for them. We play into that, and I think that will mean that we've got the makings of a successful integrated design for this railway.
And then just one more document to look at briefly. That was P61681. This takes forward some material that the committee was shown briefly before the election in relation to the Old Shire Country Park initiative. This is, just tell us what this is, Mr.
Yes, again, what we've been thinking about is how can we convey what an exemplar might look like for the mitigation I don't particularly like the word mitigation, but actually integration or restoration plan, and what might the outcome look like. And this is a piece internally that we're sort of thinking about. It is in draft, but it's a think piece really. Well, what will it include, and by way of illustration here, you can see all the sort of elements that you might consider in the Colne Valley. We might not have got all of that right, but that's something that could be teased out with the panel that's proposed. And if you want to scroll through, and we'll give a quick...
Well, I just write it on this page because you'll see that by way of introduction, it says that you've just indicated that it provides illustrative information about the mitigation and restoration of the proposed scheme as set out in the environmental statement as it passes through the Colne Valley Regional Park. And then it goes on to say in this specific sentence, the document is in draft to encourage discussions with local authorities and other relevant stakeholders. And you'll see the list of sites and areas that it encompasses. Those are the areas which are subject to construction within the bill limits, and it's looking forward to the process of developing restoration schemes for those areas after use, if you will. Looking forward to the Schedule 16, paragraph 12 process that Sir Peter asked me about at the beginning of the hearing. So it's beginning. It's beginning to fill in some of the details in terms of process.
What we're attempting to do is to give the construction and final look of the scheme some shape, some substance to what might actually happen, what an outcome might look like. It might look entirely different from this. That's up to others to think about, but it's an idea. I don't know if there are other pages we can flip through just to...
My final question was this: you heard from Mr. From Mr. Straker's ecological witness, a theme that we've heard from other petitioners, that is advocating the case for some form of biodiversity offsetting to be brought to bear on a local basis in the context of HS2. Could you just help me? Is that, if that were done, would it, in your view, would it actually help to secure the outcome that the petitioners want, which is to see a more transparent balance between the impact of the scheme and the remediation of those impacts on wildlife considerations, or might it have the contrary effect? Do you want to comment on that?
What we've aimed to do, and I've given evidence on this before, is we've been thinking about the environmental effect that the railway has. And the environmental statement then points to the most appropriate response. And in my evidence to date, and particularly with Warwickshire, what I've said is that our approach is to respond to the effect where the effect occurs. That's beneficial because it helps those species which are affected and those habitats which are affected, and we try and support those with the railway proposals. That approach benefits from the bill that we've put together. There is a range of plans, the limits of those plans all clearly set out that there is land acquisition to ensure that those mitigations and compensation measures come forward in the right way to address the effect. Yes, you could look at offsetting. I think in a couple of locations we have returned to that. Further up north, where agricultural land has been affected, we've sort of thought, well, can we think again a little bit? But that offset is not too far away. It's within proximity of the railway. There's a danger that if you go to an offset, that the offset then takes away the benefits of the response to the natural environment from the locality. It's all too easy then to say, well, we can sort of offset that and pay that off 5 miles down the road, 10 miles down the road. I'm not sure that's precisely what people are saying here, but there is a risk that it detracts locally. As you mentioned before, the offsetting, it's all still in a pilot form at the moment. It's not without those hazards, and I think that certainly a number of NGOs have put forward those views in terms of the pilots which DEFRA and Natural England have been operating. So what I would say is that the bill offers the opportunity to bring the land forward, provide the mitigation in the right way that secures it, and that affords the right protection for the natural environment.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Straker.
Thank you very much. Could we look, please, Mr. Miller, first at the document dealing with procurement, 61432, P61432, which is within the letter of the 1st of June 2015. And there we see, don't we, that on 61432, there's a passage within the letter under the heading Competitive Procurement and Assuring Quality of Design, and reference to the points raised by the Council. You've got that?
Yeah, sorry, which paragraph are you pointing to?
Well, it's not numbered, the paragraph, but it's on P6143 brackets 2,
yeah,
and the middle of the page has got a heading.
Yeah, got that.
Yes, and the heading describes the competitive procurement, and it talks through the competitive procurement exercise, including within that exercise a design panel having a role in scrutinising bottom of the page 61432, over the page to 61433, having a role in the procurement of the contracts.
Yeah.
And it contemplates the programme, doesn't it, as part of the procurement process 61432, that what you would do is have certain stages: pre-qualifying questionnaire stage, invitation to tender, and tender evaluation.
Yes.
And so what is going out and what is contemplated as going out is an invitation to various people, which may be a broad invitation, saying please provide, under those procurement regulations, your offer to undertake a particular proposed contract.
Yes.
And the particular proposed contract would be a contract to build a stretch of the railway.
Yes.
And that stretch of the railway to be built, if one's concerned with hereabouts, the Colne Valley, would include that length of the viaduct.
Yes.
And precisely what the overage would be in terms of beyond the length of the viaduct has yet to be determined.
Yes, that's right.
And the exercise in determination of who gets the contract to build would result from a consideration of a number of factors, including the cost which was put forward by the proposed tenderer.
Yes, it has to be commercially aware.
Yes.
That's why you tender.
Can I ask, will the design be separate from the construction company, or will some be design and build?
The way it's envisaged is it's kind of like a design and build, and there will be various stages of what we call early contractor involvement. There will be some design element to that, and then there will be some construction element to that, before you get to the point of finally agreeing the price and setting the contract running.
Okay, sorry.
No, not at all, because to follow on from the chairman's question, if one looks at P61433, which is within the same part of this letter, it's made perfectly plain. To this end, it is anticipated, it's expected, that the design panel will consider the design specifications and design within the procurement process.
Yeah.
So this is, as you indicated to the chairman, what is effectively a design and build procurement exercise.
Yes.
And within that exercise, in terms of the procurement process, there will be a marking exercise, won't there?
There will.
and that marking exercise will assign a value to cost and a value to other considerations.
Yes.
One of which will be design.
It will.
Yes. And so that will be different from, won't it, starting from an exercise which says, please can we have a design for a viaduct to see what it looks like.
That is different, yes.
Yeah. And the exercise of simply seeking what's the best design, what's the competitive result of the best design for a viaduct, may well be different because it will be scored, won't it, in a different way from any procurement process.
Well, you're inferring that it's that design in the procurement process is somewhat inferior to what you get from a design competition. I don't think you could infer that.
I'm asking that the question is that the design of a viaduct, if one's simply seeking, please tell me what's the best design you can come up with for this viaduct, is going to be a different question and a different answer potentially from a design and build procurement process.
I don't agree with that, because you could ask that question in the design and build process.
But
you could look at that question and think about how you weight your approach to the design and procurement. And if you look at the example on the Olympics, where good practice has come out, balanced scorecards and that sort of thing in procurement, you may well see that and encourage better design through this sort of process.
And that's going to envisage, isn't it, a weighting in terms of away from cost and in favour of design.
Yeah, but then you also infer that design, you get you only get good design because you put money into it. That's not true either.
And has this committee had any evidence from HS2 as to how that weighting in the procurement process is to be undertaken?
No, that's right.
And so we don't know at the moment as to whether the weighting in terms of cost is going to be 75% with 25% to design, or the other way around.
You don't know that. No.
All we know at the moment is that the design of this viaduct, the longest in England, is going to be dependent upon the views of the successful tenderer who wishes to build the railway, including this stretch. That's right, isn't it?
I think you're right.
Yes, thank you. Okay, well, I'll leave that matter there, please. And can I then ask you some questions about 61717? Now, you were asked some questions about 61717, in particular, two-thirds of the way down the page, the prospective assurance given in relation to a request for a master plan. Mm-hmm. And as far as that is concerned, this particular matter has yet to be agreed with, doesn't it, with the councils that I represent.
So what
this particular matter, where you're setting out at 1 under the heading request for a master plan, has yet to be agreed with the councils that I represent.
Yes, I don't believe you've agreed to that assurance. No.
And the councils that I represent have indicated, haven't they, that they support the Colne Valley Park Community Interest Company's request for a Colne Valley master plan.
I believe that's right, yes.
And they, of course, come immediately after us as far as this committee is concerned. Just if we go to the text of what you are suggesting, 1717, you are suggesting, aren't you, that there ought to be a matter of obligation in terms of consideration of landscape proposals prior to the final development of the design. a matter of obligation, Secretary of State will require to have regard to landscape before design.
Sorry, yes, you're right.
Yes?
Yes.
And so you are saying to the committee that the position is one whereby there ought to be early steps taken in respect to landscape proposals.
Yes.
And that those early steps taken in connection with landscape proposals ought to be done on a basis which is done jointly.
Yes, I've just described how we
Exactly
do that.
so. And that could produce, you say, a document such as the one which you indicated had come forward in draft, which is at P6168 bracket 1.
That's right.
Yes. And you envisage that document as being the product of a variety of, I'll call them stakeholders.
Yes.
Yes. And you envisage that document as coming forward and touching upon all the matters that bear upon the landscape of the Colne Valley affected by the railway prior to design.
Yes, in the way that the railway comes about. Yes, that's right.
And you would object to that document at 6168 bracket 1 if it came to bear the label master plan?
Well, maybe we're talking across purposes here, because I think what you're saying is a broader master plan for the Colne Valley. I'm talking about a restoration plan within the auspices of the bill and the limits, and what that means by way of the environmental effect. So, if we're not a million miles away, then I don't know. I don't think we are a million miles away.
I'm sure we're not a million miles away, because I'm sure that it's a position, isn't it, where HS2 would readily accept that it makes sense in considering the landscape proposals within the bill limits to have regard to what happens outside the bill limits, because it may be affected by those matters.
Yes, and what we've said is that we bring that forward as part of the Colne Valley panel.
And as far as the payment of the exercise is concerned to be undertaken, is that a matter which is going to be funded by HS2?
I'm not sure the answer to that, actually. I'm sorry, I'd have to find out.
Do you mean the production of this document?
Yes. And the joint working of the others involved with it. Is that right, Mr. Miller?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure that we've indicated that.
No, you certainly haven't indicated that in that letter, which is why I was prompted to ask it.
So is this the answer to the question which is answer number 6? We're asking some different question.
It's a different question. It's referable to the works which we've just been discussing under that heading, request for a master plan, and leave aside whether the outcome is called a master plan or not. My simple question is, who's paying for it?
Well, I don't think we are. I think we're as you say, we looked at the Colne Valley panel, and we've been quite clear about how we'd manage that and where those costs would go to.
And the exercise arises, doesn't it, because of the arrival of the railway and not otherwise?
The Colne Valley panel does,
Yes.
as we've offered, yes, that's right.
Can I come in? The document that we were shown a minute ago, the restoration document, that's an HS2 document, and the production of that document will be funded by the project.
Yeah, that's a product of our work.
Well, I don't take that matter further in terms of question. Can I just then finally, please, ask you some questions referable to (105630), and this touches upon the point which was canvassed with you by my learned friend, referable to offsetting. And as far as 30 is concerned, we see there an approximation of, on the one hand, that which can be said to be either lost or affected. We've not noted the point about standing water, and that which is gained. Yes?
Yes, this is your...
Yes.
Sorry, these are our facts here. This is what your
they're
interpretation is.
They're all your figures, ultimately.
Oh, right.
And the position there is we see, subject to, there are some questions which arise, a deficiency in the order of 2 to 1.
Sorry, no, that's what you say. I don't agree with the standing water.
I know it's been a long day, but you will recall, perhaps you weren't here, when we decided that putting some piers in didn't destroy the water around the piers.
No, I certainly was here, sir, and I said in my question, subject to some deficiencies in the numbers.
Well, that's 21 of the 20...
Well,
25 acres.
There's still obviously an impact.
It's about 80% of what we were talking about.
There's still plainly an impact. So I just am interested to know, as far as your exercise is concerned, in saying that we will not be interested in producing the metric which has been spoken to by my witness, you contemplate that provision can be made anywhere in terms of no net loss as far as the railway is concerned. Is that what you're saying?
No, what we've said is that the way we've looked at biodiversity as a whole across the line of the route is that our approach to no net loss is a whole route consideration. There are areas along the line of the route where we won't be able to make an appropriate response. There are areas along the line of the route where other petitioners have a view, and that is modifying what the railway and the mitigation actually looks like. And so what we've said is that we would return to the calculation at the end of the process once we had a better idea of what the route looked like and what the no net loss aspiration, our aspiration, what the route, how the route was going to perform at that point in time, and that's later on in the process. So we haven't said that there is a no net loss in any one particular location or area.
Yes, and this could lead, couldn't it, as far as the Colne Valley is concerned, to an imbalance between that which is lost and that which is put back by way of the gain?
It could, and that's what we brought forward in the environmental assessment, and that's the sort of thing that's got to be decided through this committee and considered and then decided upon.
Very well, I can leave matters there. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Mould, any
No, thank you.
further questions? Okay, I think any final comments, Mr. Straker?
Well, the only final comment I would make is that if you go back to that note which I put at the beginning, I do want those 4 things in the forefront of the committee's minds: importance of characteristics of the Colne Valley, absence of a tunnel. We've got this very long viaduct and we can see how that can be dealt with, and it could be dealt with by an international competition. We've got this problem over mitigation, and we've dealt with the M25, or appear to have dealt with the M25. So we have those matters still for thought and consideration, upon which we respectfully request the assistance of this committee, probably simply in a way to prompt HS2 just to go that little bit further than they've hitherto gone with us.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Straker. Thank you very much for your contribution today. We now move on to the next petitioner, which is the Colne Valley Park Community Interest Company. And I know you've sat through most of the proceedings today and still in good humour. And we've covered some of the area which no doubt you're going to cover, which means you're, I hope, going to be punchy and to the point when we, at the end of the day.
If I could have slide 1062-1, please. Petition by the Colne Valley Park Community Interest Company. I'll introduce myself. Richard Skeans. I'm the chair of the Colne Valley Park CIC, and I'm supported by Mike Nye, who's sitting behind me, and also speaking will be Stuart Pomeroy and Robin Jones. If I can have the next slide, please. Thank you. I have asked my colleagues to try not to cover ground that's already been covered today, because I do appreciate the Select Committee must be getting slightly weary of the same information coming forward. Before I continue, I'd like to say that we represent about 10,000 people through the CIC, and as you can imagine, the majority of our members aren't desperately keen on HS2. However, we acknowledge that this is a national infrastructure project, and as such, we'd like to take a pragmatic approach to it. And we hope that this approach can achieve the best outcomes for HS2 and our members, whilst trying to protect this very fragile and important part of the Colne Valley Park.
But may I ask, are they shareholders, or how does it work?
No. It's the community interest company doesn't have any shareholders. It's just a company formed by the community. I'll go into a little detail of that in a moment. But
it does good without getting profit for persons, for individuals.
Absolutely. The next slide, please. We talked about the Colne Valley Park and what's the significance of it. Very, very briefly, it was formed 50 years ago. It's our anniversary this year. And Stuart Pomeroy's already touched on that. And it was formed originally by local authorities. And about 4 years ago, they decided that, in fact, it was more practical that a company was formed to continue their good work. And that's what happened. In the same year that the Colne Valley Park was formed, the Lee Valley Park was also formed, but unfortunately for us, they had the benefit of an Act of Parliament, and as you know, they've gone from strength to strength, hosting the part of the Olympics, etc. We're much more modest than that, unfortunately, and if I could have the next slide. And whilst being modest, some of our achievements are pretty good on a very, very small budget. We've 50 kilometres of new paths, 5 country parks, and for every £1 invested by our partners, we get external funding to the tune of £6. So we do very well in that respect. And through Mike Nye and Friends of the Colne Valley Park, there are over 3,300 volunteer days each year, and we have over 2 million visitors to the park. So it's quite an enterprise, and it's well loved by all the members. Obviously, the long-standing partnership is with the local authorities who founded the concept of the park, and we currently have 65 members of the CIC, which is growing. If I could have the next slide, please. Partly with thanks to HS2, that's attracted a number of new members for us. This gives you a list of the members that we have, and we literally represent tens of thousands of people within the Colne Valley Park. And as such, we feel that we need to do the best we can for the park, and in particular, the piece of land that HS2 is going to go across is very fragile. It's a very, very important part of the park to its members, hence our reason that we're here today. If I could have slide 1061, please. when we first started, or when HS2 was first mentioned, I don't think there was much acknowledgement of the Colne Valley Park. And although, actually, is that 1061? Yes, okay. Could I have slide 10612 to start with, please? Right, it's not that one. 16, that one. That one. Yeah. Yes. Right. Okay. Can we go back to 101, please? This one, if I can get it. Oh, yes. Sorry. 10:61, please. Right. Thank you. I've got there eventually. As you know, and as you've heard today, a number of our asks are also linked into our local partners, the local authorities in particular. But I'd like to point out number 3, that the nominated undertaker is obliged to investigate and pursue the alternatives to the sustainable placement of soil. This is quite important to us, and Robin Jones will comment on that going forward. And if I could have 1062, please. And as well as the common asks, we also have a number of petition elements that are specifically related to the Colne Valley CIC. I'm not going to do any more than let you look at the slide, and they will be brought up at a later date by my colleagues. However, we do have support from a number of people, including a number of members of Parliament. If I can have 1061-1, please. And this is a letter that has been forwarded to you, Mr. Chairman, and no doubt you've seen. And if I can have 1061-2. And these are 4 of the local MPs who have signed the letter and also made specific requests within the letter. I will pass across to my colleagues, but I'd like to come back at the end just to sum up, if I may. And if I could pass across to Stuart at the moment.
Okay, thank you. I already introduced myself when I appeared, called by South Bucks. To save time, I won't do that again. If I could have slide 1062-7, please. Again, to save time, because I'm aware of what the time is, I'm not going to go through each of these. You can see what the requests are. It's basically about supporting the asks of others relating to a tunnel, abandonment of the Heathrow Spur to avoid land blight, and the viaduct that you've just heard about. If I could have the next slide, please. Now, this is about presenting the case for a Colne Valley plan, and I must admit it feels like an odd position to be in at the moment, presenting this case to the Search Committee after High Speed 2 have questioned it. We've had lots of discussion about it, but I hope what I say will set that discussion that we've just had in context. This case is presented on behalf of the Colne Valley Park CIC and the local authorities that High Speed 2 cuts across in this part of the park. And the next few slides are based on the document that you've already heard about, the Land Use Consultants Landscape-led approach to HS2 in Bucks and the Colne Valley. I'm going to focus today on the request for a Colne Valley plan. You'll hear more about the document when Bucks County Council appear later. The map on this slide shows the construction areas which will have a huge impact across the northern third of the Colne Valley Regional Park. And these impacts in the Colne Valley Park are amongst, as you've previously heard, some of the most severe and long-term along the entire route. Therefore, the landscape and its function must be protected in the best possible way. Could I have the next slide, please? So, without going into detail, this slide outlines the landscape character of the Colne Valley, provides a few photographs of that character. If we could move on to 1062-10, please. This outlines the landscape impact of High Speed 2. High Speed 2 will result in loss of and damage to recreation facilities, wildlife and productive farmland, severance and fragmentation of landscape and loss of countryside experience. There's more detail down on the slide, but I won't go through that. Back to the next one, please. So this shows the key landscape principles for the Colne Valley and the call for the Colne Valley Plan. I'd like to provide a summary of the asks, focusing on the issues and our solutions. So the first one is that we believe the environmental statement is generic and engineering-led, doesn't acknowledge or respond to the impacts on the Colne Valley Park, isn't Colne Valley specific. So our solution is that it should be landscape-led and relate to the Colne Valley Park, adopting the landscape principles from that document that can then be developed into practical proposals. Our second issue is that the environmental statement takes a top-down approach. Our solution is we request that it needs proactive involvement of local organisations and input of local knowledge into shaping design of mitigation for the area. A third issue is about timing. At the moment, it appears like it's going to be quite a reactive approach post-Royal Assent, when the pressure will be on High Speed 2 to commence construction, which will mitigate against achieving local support for innovative and imaginative solutions. We're requesting that we make a start on this process and involvement of local input at the earliest possible opportunity to give time for these locally led solutions to be considered prior to Royal Assent, and these local solutions can then inform and help the detailed design post-Royal Assent. Fourthly is about local proactive involvement and bringing in local knowledge. We'd like the opportunity to work with High Speed 2 to bring forward detailed proposals and mechanisms for implementation for land and property impacted by construction and the final scheme, in line with the objectives of the Colne Valley Park for that multifunctional land use. That will include detail on design, land use and ongoing management of the land. We're very much focusing on use of the land and ensuring that land retains productive use, which is what it has at the moment. Fifthly, about resourcing, requesting that funding provided by High Speed 2 shall cover the costs of preparation of the Colne Valley Plan and the participation of stakeholders in the steering group, which you've referred to as the panel. If I can move on to the next slide, please, to talk about the area for the landscape, for the approach. Our issue is that the environmental statement only mitigates and compensates in a very tight area within the land required for construction. Our point being the impacts of High Speed 2 will be felt across the whole landscape and can only be addressed on a landscape scale, rather than just by working solely within the geographical confines of the land required as part of the hybrid bill. So our solution, the map shows a proposed area for the Colne Valley Plan, which includes, firstly, land within the HS2 bill limits that will be required during construction. Secondly, land within the Colne Valley Park that provides the setting for High Speed 2 and will be affected by High Speed 2. And thirdly, land within the Colne Valley Park where mitigation for the effects of High Speed 2 can take place. The area for that plan, as defined on that map, has been defined by mapping lots of issues and impacts on the Colne Valley. I'll just focus on one or two. The Colne Valley Trail and the National Cycle Network. I've already talked about the tranquility of this route previously and the promoted routes that share it. That will be severely impacted by High Speed 2. There are no realistic diversions for that route that can be made that do not avoid crossing the HS2 line. Therefore, we feel the route and connections to the north and south of this new intrusion across the landscape must be enhanced. We've got reference on that mapping of Colne Valley circular walks and other public rights of way outside of the bill area, so that alternatives to the Old Shire Lane, Chalfont Park and Grand Union Canal circular walks that will be directly impacted by High Speed 2 can be provided. This will ensure residents of Denham, Harefield, Maple Cross, etc., plus visitors to the Colne Valley Park from further afield still have access to attractive countryside routes on their doorstep. Talking about wetland habitats, you've heard about from Dr. Thornhill. I'm going to talk more about woodland later on in this presentation, but the key point being that the impacts on wildlife, community facilities, farmland and countryside attractions for residents and visitors within the Colne Valley Park must be mitigated and compensated for within the Colne Valley Park. If I could have the next slide, please. So we feel the Colne Valley Plan can provide solutions to some of the Colne Valley Park CIC's petitioning points, strategy for positive use of fragmented land. We're concerned that land that currently has a viable use, where that use is being made unviable because of High Speed 2, will decline in future due to the unique pressures and challenges on land in this area in the rural-urban fringe. It's vital that land in the urban fringe retains a productive use even more so than in more rural areas. We request that High Speed 2 work with the Colne Valley CIC, with local authorities and other stakeholders to develop a strategy for positive use of fragmented land in line with the 6 objectives of the Colne Valley to ensure that the whole of sites that are partially within the construction boundary can be open for mitigation and compensation. With regard to mitigating the effects on biodiversity, as I've mentioned, Dr. Thornhill, he was quizzed on requesting more, but not specific on what more is. Well, we feel the Colne Valley Plan can help all of us to bring forward proposals that are worked up, costed and consented that can address some of those questions. Moving on to compensation for loss of visitor sites and facilities. Again, the examples, Hoac, Denham Water Ski Club, Broadwater Lake, Savay Lake, the fisheries, canal boating facilities. Mitigation on these sites and others should be guided by the landscape principles. And I'll now, if I may, move on to some specific points of examples of what could be achieved through this proposal. Firstly relating to public rights of way, then looking at woodland. Could I have the next slide, please? So with regard to public rights of way, our concerns are that the rights of way, Colne Valley circular walks and other promoted routes will be unattractive for local users during construction and considerably less attractive than they are now once the railway is operational. Secondly, the impact on routes elsewhere in this part of the park, for instance the far-reaching views across the valley from the other sides. Our asks are for more practical diversions of the rights of way and the request for alternative routes and viewpoints to be provided through investment in upgrades of circular walks elsewhere in the north of the Colne Valley Park. High Speed 2's response in the PRD does not address our concerns. For example, in paragraph 2 on page 20 of the PRD response, they state the shortest practical route has normally been adopted. We disagree with that, and I'll come on to that in the next slide. With regard to our proposed solutions, if I could have the next slide, please, we're going to focus on the permanent route diversions as we feel that during construction these paths will be so unattractive as to make them undesirable to visit. We're therefore looking at the park in the future, and that's based on the assumption that High Speed 2 accept our ask and are willing to work with us to ensure that the Colne Valley Park has a future. Our request for footpath diversions is to adopt 2 principles to make the paths more attractive to users. Firstly, to shorten the length of the permanent diversions, and secondly, to avoid stretches that run parallel to High Speed 2 or to associated infrastructure. And that we should also take opportunities to enhance the connectivity of the rights-of-way network in the Colne Valley. So this slide gives some examples of how those 2 principles can be adopted. If we look in the top corner at CSP 16 that's labelled there, very simply our request is that in addition to the proposed diversion, the existing route should be reopened post-construction. This will avoid walkers connecting between CSP 16 and CSP 44 and those using the Chalfont Park Circular Walk having to double back on themselves along the road there. We move on to Rickmansworth 04. We've presented the request depicted on the map there to High Speed 2. Now, the exact line shown has been rejected due to technical issues that were not immediately apparent from looking at the environmental statement map book. However, we would very much like to work with High Speed 2 and for High Speed 2 to work with us to find a better solution than High Speed 2's current proposed diversion that adopts those two principles we're putting forward. And finally, on this slide, Den 3 in the bottom corner, we request a shorter permanent diversion that's entirely within HS2's existing land take. In addition, in relation to this area, we support the ask of the Ramblers Association for a diversion of CSP 43 west of the M25 during construction. If I could move on to the next slide, please. The map on this side shows the area from Denham Quarry to Breakspear Road South. Looking at U34, the environmental statement appears to show the diversion along a site access road and adjacent to the proposed Ickenham auto transformer feeding station, which would, to understate slightly, not be an attractive route. Our preferred option would be to follow the New Year's Green Bourne, which would keep the route closer to its existing line and offer a much more attractive experience to the user. And then, if I may, just briefly outline three opportunities to enhance the connectivity of the rights of way network. And I'd like to point out all of these are entirely within the existing HS2 land take. U31 will request an additional diversion around the north side of the National Grid feeder station, in addition to the proposed diversion around the south side. This will reduce the route length for walkers arriving along the paths from the Colne Valley Trail from South Harefield to the north. And then looking back at U34, the red dotted lines here on the map, there's a requested extension of U34 across Harville Road, including a safe crossing point, through the habitat creation area that will be created after the scheme to link up with another footpath U42 south of Braemar Farm. The dotted line there is just solely indicative. How we get from A to B can be discussed as part of this Colne Valley plan process. And finally, with rights of way, request a new path from the same point at U34 on the new footway heading south on the proposed Harville Road diversion and the new bridge, and then through again the habitat creation area that will be created after construction to link up with U49 southwest of Brackenbury Farm. Again, the same principles apply. That's just an A to B line on the map, and we can work out. We'll be very happy to work out detail in future. Coming on to, I'll only briefly mention temporary diversions, only to say that we support the asks of the London Borough of Hillingdon that you're going to hear next week, that we brought up as part of their petition relating to the temporary diversions of footpaths in this and the wider part of the Colne Valley. I have written support for the proposals that I've just described on the last two slides from Buckinghamshire County Council, Hertfordshire County Council, the London Borough of Hillingdon and the Ramblers Association. And if I may, trying to speed on, if I could move to the last slide in the section that I'll be presenting, which is 17, please. So this is a focus on woodland, and I'd like to talk about High Speed 2's proposed woodland planting as identified in the environmental statement. We believe that the landscape master plan approach can, the approach we're providing can result in some of this woodland planting being better located if we can work with High Speed 2 to come up with that. I'll give you two examples. The first of all, the Tower House Lane woodland creation area, which is the area just about there, outlined in brown on the map. We do support the proposals to link up the existing woodlands in this area by woodland planting. However, the woodland planting on Mrs Dutfield's land, tenanted to Mr Sheriff, should be reduced to a smaller strip to ensure that the land is not unnecessarily taken out of agricultural production. We're already losing quite a lot of agricultural land in the Colne Valley anyway. The detail, the size of the connecting strip between Juniper Wood and Little Halings Wood to provide that connectivity should be based on evidenced ecological advice, and we're happy to have more discussions with the landowners on that. And secondly, the map's vanished on the screen in front of me, but the Broadwater Lake tree planting area, which you previously heard about from the Herts and Middlesex Wildlife Trust, we request that proposed woodland planting is removed from the area of Broadwater Lake that the Trust have been managing to reduce tree cover shading the lake edge over the last few years. Some of this woodland planting, as proposed by High Speed 2 from the above sites, could be relocated to other sites within the Colne Valley Park that are already being lost to agricultural use due to construction activity. Locations of appropriate sites can be agreed as part of this Colne Valley Plan approach. This could include planting to recreate historic woodland that has been lost since the first edition OS map, and there are some areas of woodland that have been lost since then that are within HS2's existing land take, which are indicated in the sort of greeny blue on the map. This is an example of and with the rights of way, is an example of how the overview can create solutions if we have local input and local involvement. We're also requesting a different approach to mitigation and compensation in the Colne Valley through an endowment for surviving ancient woodland adjacent to the route to improve it for the benefit of people and wildlife. Northmore Hill Wood and Wyatt's Covert, as outlined in blue on the map. You can see that, and you'll hear more about this from my colleague Robin Jones as part of his evidence, and I'd like to pass on to Robin now, please.
We've got a lovely blank screen at the moment,
sorry,
so we're just making it.
Do you want to share mine? You can if you want.
Can you see that, Robin?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, that's right.
Did I tap it too hard?
No.
No worries.
We've got one there.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Thanks very much. And thank you, Select Committee, for indulging us in another take on the Colne Valley. I mean, what Stuart has just done for you is just to clarify the issues for which we're looking for specific mitigation for HS2 in the Colne Valley. My take on this is slightly different in that I'm trying to advocate some pragmatic, practical, but nonetheless ambitious ways in which resilience could be built into the Colne Valley as an environment, as an economy, and where people live, for which we're seeking some specific remedies. So I shall try to entice you with those. Just a little bit, just briefly about myself. Like Stuart, I'm also employed by the environmental charity Groundwork, acting as managing agents for the Colne Valley Park. I personally had over 30 years' experience in involvement with community-based regeneration and conservation schemes, and that's actually included being co-author of the feasibility study into the countryside management scheme for High Speed 1, commissioned by Union Railways some 20 years ago, so some familiar territory. At that time I was living in North Kent, and still am in fact, close by where the first high-speed rail line was built. And so I personally experienced firsthand the reality of how infrastructure projects of this kind impact on the environment and on the lives of local communities in the firing line. So what are we asking for? We're looking for a package of mitigation, Stuart's outlined, but in addition to that we're seeking investment into specific initiatives designed to produce a better environmental and Valley and its communities. And just to reiterate that it's not an ask not just of ourselves but also our local authority partners and, as you saw earlier, the local MPs whose constituencies coincide with the Colne Valley Park. So in terms of the basis of our concern, I mean, this might sound a little repetitive, but I think one or two things need emphasis, because by HS2's own admission, the northern section of the Colne Valley is going to be impacted more intensively and for longer during the construction phase than any locality along the entire line outside of the extremities in London and Birmingham, and that's a pretty key point. When you took evidence from Damien Green MP last year, I think he very much highlighted the particular pressures that are experienced in localities during the years of construction, and certainly we concur with that assessment, bearing in mind that's the full 10 years. But as well as the physical impacts of the Colne Valley that already many petitioners have described in detail to the Select Committee since the middle of March, we're equally concerned about the reputational damage to the Colne Valley that will inevitably sustain as a consequence of High Speed 2 construction, and the consequent impact on businesses that serve the leisure and recreational needs and interests of local residents and visitors alike. Furthermore, although the Colne Valley Park doesn't enjoy the same level of legal protection to, say, designated national parks or areas of outstanding natural beauty, we feel quite piqued actually about the rather dismissive way in which High Speed 2 has and continues to be dismissive about the Colne Valley. I mean, that's, I have to say, improved of late, but we can't get away from statements like about flooded former gravel workings. I mean, they may be former flooded gravel workings, but I think such a negative connotation wouldn't be applied to maybe the flooded former peat workings of the Northern Broads, for example. And this extends to the Colne Valley Park itself, whose rationale and core support on which its viability depends as a business is going to be severely threatened. Even if the extended North Holt Tunnel option, due to be presented by Hillingdon to you next week, were to be adopted by HS2, the Colne Valley will still be dramatically impacted, as the construction footprint around West Hyde, as illustrated on the slide, which that you've got there, but pretty familiar, I think, to you. And the need for mitigation and compensation would therefore remain, basically, even with the tunnel option. We believe that the provisions made for compensation in the hybrid bill are not adequate or well aligned to address this type of impact, and that's about enabling a locality to adapt to change. That the CIC believes that experience from other projects of this type, where solutions have been found elsewhere, and where there's been a willingness to accommodate a greater degree of flexibility, can provide a few bits of inspiration for ourselves and HS2. So what's HS2's response been so far? Well, this will be quite familiar in that obviously last autumn government announced its intention to make available two linked funds, a community and environment fund and a business and local economy fund, to offset community impacts as a consequence of the railway being built. Taken together, these funds would totally, as announced, £30 million, albeit that the proportion of that total that will be dedicated to each of those two strands is as yet unspecified, and to be made available through a process which is yet to be confirmed. HS2's response to the CIC via their PRD and recent meetings predictably made reference to these funds as providing the answers to our grievance. The CIC, along with many other local authorities, conservation bodies and community organisations, believe that this level of resource and the criteria currently being applied to them will in practice be wholly inadequate to meet the legitimate aspirations of communities along the 230 kilometres of the route. We're very conscious that Buckinghamshire County Council are leading on this topic as a route-wide issue, and therefore will be presenting to Select Committee in due course. But without stealing their thunder, the CIC would wish to highlight the potential consequences for the Colne Valley if the proposals for the CEF and the BLFEF remain unchanged, and to contrast what has been achieved elsewhere with the different thinking. When only £2 million was made available to fund High Speed 1's Rail Link Countryside initiative some 15 years ago, and incidentally the bottom-up demand-led feasibility study in which I was a part had revealed an aspiration for projects totalling 10 times that value. An immediate consequence was that the locations in tunnel on High Speed 1 were not eligible to apply for this available funding because it was so limited. The local authorities from London to Birmingham engaged in this process have already made it quite clear that an equivalent approach to rationing is not going to be tolerated this time around. So making an assumption that the CEF and the BLEF combined were applied pro rata to High Speed 2, then the value that would stick to the small number of kilometres in the Colne Valley would be the equivalent of a fairly derisory £35,000 to £50,000 per annum over the anticipated 10-year life of the funds. Such a level of resource could in no way compensate for the intensity and the breadth of the impacts that are proposed. Just by contrast, the Hillingdon Community Trust has been not so long ago endowed with £1 million per annum over 15 years by Heathrow to compensate for the local impacts just from the building of Terminal 5. So what are our proposed solutions? We're very mindful, having said all that the pressure on public finance very much remains, and that there's obviously a natural reluctance by HS2 and the Select Committee to support demands that could lead to an increase in the overall costs of the project. That's entirely understandable. So in seeking a remedy for the Colne Valley, we've sought to relate our demands to existing provisions or activities that HS2 can control or influence, and to achieve value for money on any additional investment that we'll have to be making available. Now, the minimum that the CIC would expect to receive as an assurance would be a dedicated or ring-fenced allocation to the Colne Valley Park from the CEF and BLEF funds. The current proposals, which are now back to December 2014, made by consultants employed by HS2 called NPC, include a strategic project category, which is about delivering strategic outcomes for multiple communities with a value of £150,000 to £1 million. The top end of this scale would be required to make a difference in the Colne Valley, given the level and duration of blight that will have to be endured there. Invested in activities that I'll just outline briefly for you now. But the CIC are requesting actually a higher level of provision for community environmental compensation in the same way that Union Railways committed £750,000 over 5 years to the Cobham and Ashenbank Special Landscape Area for Conservation and Landscape Enhancement over and above the £2 million set aside for the High Speed 1 Rail Link Countryside Initiative in recognition of its significance and level of local impact. So that was proposed over and above the original hybrid bill for HS1, and that's what happened there. Now, it's interesting, obviously, with inflation, that figure would be worth about £1.2 million today. Now, such an ask obviously needs to be placed in context. It's very well talking about large sums of money. The HS2's reference route budget for mitigation works and planting in the Colne Valley, or at least the CFA 7 parts of the Colne Valley alone, we believe to be some £23 million. And that's a figure that was obtained by London Borough of Hillingdon via a Freedom of Information request that they made last year. So just to briefly run through the kinds of activities that we would seek to undertake through a dedicated funding package and benefits that might be derived from a similar scheme. Firstly, about investment in recreational routes and infrastructure. Stuart has already outlined about a different or a better approach to getting outcomes for public rights of way. But the construction and management of High Speed 2 is also going to have a profound impact on the attractiveness and usability of many other non-statutory recreational routes, footpaths, cycle routes and bridleways in this part of the Colne Valley. These are the kinds of facilities that visitors expect to find in the park, and indeed for many it's the reason why they choose to visit in the first place. And of course leisure interests, including the Denham Country Park Visitor Centre, which the CIC manages, shops, pubs and cafes, etc., clearly going to be impacted as a byproduct of that. There are at least 10 recreational routes, including very popular circular walks promoted by the CIC, the Grand Union Canal towpath and the National Cycle Route that will be affected either temporarily or permanently, for which solutions and alternatives need to be found and paid for right from the start of building works if visitors are not to be deterred. Lost for good. Our preliminary cost estimate is a figure of at least £100,000 for suitable remedies subject to detailed designs. By their very nature, these kinds of solutions are to be found outside of HS2's development boundary and therefore deemed to be enhancements that others should pay for. Yet without the imposition of the new railway in the valley, they would clearly not be required. HS2's own information paper E6 covering mitigation, significant effects on public open space and community facilities, makes provision for compensation in these circumstances. But they're clearly not aimed at places on the scale of Colne Valley Park, although equally maybe they ought to be. Literally just one or two, Peter. Oh, sorry, I will try and be...
Because not for you,
yes,
but for anybody else who presents, don't read out page after page.
I appreciate that.
You lose us.
I understand.
If you circulate your words
yes.
and then talk to them,
yes.
we'll do better. We'll keep going.
Thank you very much. And I do take the point in time. Yeah. And so the next area is around investment solutions for land damaged or fragmented by construction and impacts. And already, again, Stuart has outlined some of the solutions that can be achieved. This is on slide 21. And I perhaps just make the suggestion that, and again, the reason why I think a proactive approach to looking at landscape, not just as a visual entity, but in terms of its land use, is useful at this time, because you could easily get, for example, uses that could help to bolster the notion of the Colne Valley as a place to visit by, for example, having new facilities that are maybe noisy that could go along next to HS2, which otherwise might not always be there. The next area is around the management of ancient woodland, and although it's been obviously brought up as a general topic, the particular take here is the notion that rather than just invest the environmental mitigation, which clearly HS2 have got provision for, into new planting and various other measures, we are advocating, and from recent meetings with HS2, this has been, I think, responded to quite positively, that actually improving the quality and the management of existing ancient woodland in proximity to the line should be part of the mix. And the CIC themselves actually own such ancient woodland immediately adjacent to the line, Northmore Hill Wood and Wyatt's Covert, just opposite the Water Ski Club. And that would be a prime example where one could carry that out, and we have done plans and costings of that. Just to reach the end quickly, also we think in building that resilience, we're advocating things like a marketing post and an events programme, basically things that can practically make sure that the valley remains an attractive place to visit, particularly in the first 2 or 3 years of construction, which is the time when people are most likely to be turned off visiting it. Another deviation is the idea of to do with employment creation and skills development. Now, clearly HS2 have made a virtue of the employment creation and skills development potential building and operating the railway, and of course that's very much to be welcomed. But of course in devoting so much attention to the National College of High Speed Rail, which is very remote from localities like the Colne Valley, we and many others would advocate more of a kind of hub and spoke model for how apprentices and work experience could be provided through the construction programme. And as a particular example, Groundwork as a charity that you may know are very heavily involved in training for unemployed, particularly young people, providing apprenticeships and training, enabling them to get work, literally thousands of people a year. And the idea of green teams being able to undertake works on the back of some of the enormous HS2 landscaping and maintenance contracts, on the face of it is a no-brainer. Now, we know that clearly there are some provisions for, during the procurement process, for tenderers to take account of local providers, but on the face of it, we think that they're overly vague and not necessarily going to deliver the kind of outcome that one could really achieve with a bit of imagination. And the final point is a different thought or take on looking at sustainable placement. Although we oppose the principle of sustainable placement of waste materials within the Colne Valley Park, there will be 3 sites within Hillingdon of that type. Buckinghamshire County Council obviously leading it as a route-wide issue, so we're not really talking about that principle. The particular issue that I wanted to finish up on is the idea that where local use can be found for some of this surplus material, and we have been investigating with industry experts, S. Walsh, who've been responsible for creatively using much or proportion of the arisings from Crossrail, for example, where created nature reserves for RSPB on a former landfill in Pitsea, and also in using it for great development sites. We've looked at a couple of sites locally in the Colne Valley which have the potential for restoration at Langley and Slough, which could even be accessed by a canal. On the face of it, of course, and we realise that it's one thing saying restore local sites, but because of the impacts on the road, local road network, of course they've got to be practical and technically sound, which we fully appreciate. And the final point associated was that if any net revenue that can be derived from schemes like this, which we're willing to invest ourselves in creating those solutions, rather than just stick or disappear back into HS2 budget, can be actually stick to local objectives. And indeed it might be the way in which the kind of extra investment that we're advocating, or I've been advocating for the last few minutes, could be paid for. Again, hopefully a sign that we're thinking about this whole thing in a very pragmatic and practical way. So I will stop there, and our chair will now provide a concluding remarks.
Thank you. If I can have the next slide to sort of highlight the issues. Firstly, the community interest company, I'd never really been involved in one before, and I think they're a reasonably new concept. I've been absolutely delighted by the enthusiasm of our members. They're passionate about the area where they live and they want to improve it. And I've been quite humbled by them actually, and the amount of work the volunteers are prepared to do. And so I want to point out we're not anti-High Speed 2. We're realists, we know it's going to happen. What we want to do is say that if it does happen, how can we mitigate the effects on the Colne Valley Park? We're hosting this infrastructure of national significance, but there doesn't appear to be any great major local benefit. And mitigation obviously is important, but it has to be the right mitigation, and it has to be how and when it's delivered as well. We acknowledge there are constraints with a hybrid build process and pressures on public finance, but we do believe there's a better outcome that is possible. And as a company, we're trusted by our members, by our landowners, and you'll have seen today by the local authorities. And we believe that we have a role to play, almost as an honest broker. People believe us in the area. They know that we're looking after the Colne Valley Park, and I would hope that HS2 could work very closely with us to try and mitigate the damage that inevitably is going to be caused by such a project. And we would be very happy to work with them in order to achieve the best outcome that we can for the Colne Valley Park.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. We've had a counter over some of this earlier, and I suspect we'll be back dealing with a lot of these issues again over the next few weeks, but Mr. Mould.
Yes, and very much have those thoughts in mind. It was helpful indeed that Mr. Skene should have ended as he did, because he emphasised that the bill is but part of a process of developing the scheme for this railway line, and the bill in part it sets up the framework in which the detail of mitigating the railway not only through the Colne Valley but elsewhere, but particularly through the Colne Valley, how that is going to be achieved, and everybody is looking to do so to achieve the best results that can reasonably achieve. Now, I say reasonably achieved because, as the petitioners have rightly acknowledged, everything comes at a cost, and the railway has to be delivered in an effective way, which means it has to be cost effective. But we all understand that, there's no issue about that. And what the project has sought to do in the discussions it's been having not only with this company but also with the local authorities from whom you've heard earlier, and others indeed, is to focus in recent weeks and days upon putting forward a coherent process whereby the plans for mitigating the effects of the railway through the Colne Valley, both in terms of design, landscape treatment and so on, and indeed compensating for those effects through the provisions of the bill, that those are dealt with in a coherent and collaborative way, as Mr. Miller has described when he gave evidence to you earlier. And the Colne Valley panel is intended to be the vehicle through which the powers in the bill and the procedures set up in the bill can indeed deliver in an effective way as this company and others wish to see. And so rather than go through again some of the detail of the assurances that we have offered in relation to that, which are themselves a process of actively being discussed and negotiated between those who've appeared before you today. I simply draw attention to one of the matters that's been included in the letter that has gone today, both to the councils and also indeed to the company, which says that the Secretary of State will require the initiation of the panel if more than 4 of the stakeholders agree to its initiation. And amongst those whom are listed are the company and the councils you've heard from today. Now, clearly, the assurances need to be in a form that is acceptable to all parties before the process can take effect. But I draw attention to that because the idea is that this is a vehicle that, if parties agree to it, should start its work sooner rather than later. It's not intended that it should await royal assent for the bill. It's intended that it should assist at an early stage in the development of the detail of the bill as it passes through the Colne Valley. And if that is done, I would submit that broadly speaking, the matters that you heard about just now, canvassed by the company, would fall naturally within the ambit of the discussions that would take place. The view being, with a view to delivering a set of proposals for approval under Schedule 16 to the bill, with regard to cost and bill powers and so forth, which we have to take into account, a set of proposals that will be informed by the views of this company and will be informed by the views of the councils as well. So, as I say, I think that's as far as I want to go now, without repeating what Mr. Miller said to you earlier.
On the issue of rights of way, there were some specific. I don't want to go into each individual right of way, but I presume that if the company and if the local authorities broadly want to discuss this, and particularly within the bill limit, that the HS2 are happy to do that. And
yes, and indeed, as was mentioned, we've already had some discussions with the company about the specific proposals they've put forward. Some of them are more limited than others, and the ones which are more ambitious do raise the question that Sir Peter raised earlier regarding whether it's better on balance to leave the promotion of enhancements to public rights of way to the local authorities who have powers for that purpose, rather than seek to extend a railway bill, if you like, beyond its logical limits. And we have got some concerns.
It's actually put the other way around. It's better to use the bill through the local authorities wanted, or whether to leave it out. So, well, there are alternative ways.
There's a balance to be struck, and certainly there are a couple of those which are mentioned on the slides you've been shown. I'm not going to take time going to it now. We're concerned they perhaps go to the limit or beyond the limit of what one would seek to do. But we, of course, are happy to continue to discuss those matters. The other thing, of course, is that because public rights of way obviously involve creating new rights often over private land, they do require certain. They're rather more technical in terms of the way in which the bill has to be adjusted to achieve them, and one is alive to the risk of relatively minor matters delaying the passage of the bill through the parliamentary process. That's why I mentioned the possibility that if people want to secure a wider enhancement, it may be better to deal with it through existing general powers.
And the two funds which were discussed, clearly it's still a little early days in terms of how they would dispense their money in terms of up the line. And
yes, I think it is right to reiterate the point that the government and the promoter have made, which is that the bill, the delivery of the bill through the detailed design process will be funded by the promoter, and that will include the preparation of designs through the work of the collaborative work that the panel initiative is designed to achieve. The corollary to that is that the fund is there to provide something outside the bill to fund meritorious proposals from the local communities along the route, and we've given you some indication of how that's working. It is still, as you say, work in progress, but it's not presently intended that there should be any wider funding beyond those two. So those two elements. So you've got the cost of producing a delivery on the bill. You've got the business and community fund. We're not proposing that there should be anything beyond that, which is by way of funding through the promotion of HS2.
We heard the discussion earlier about the difficulty that we've got bill limits and others want a master plan which exceeds the bill limits, and clearly there is some public benefit beyond the bill limits, and this is one area of the country where there are millions of people that access this particular area because it's right next to London and a heavy population area. So clearly I think the issue would have the area would have quite a high claim on additional monies in order to improve what was there.
But of course, one shouldn't forget that if the local planning authorities, prompted perhaps by the company, if they take the view that they should devote some of their resources as local planning authority to a wider planning initiative in response to the railway, then that is something that is open to them under their own planning powers, and they have and obviously the broader settlement of funding which local planning authorities seek is in principle available for that purpose.
So Peter,
I think I recall, perhaps inaccurately, that in some other parts of the line, other counties, there have been agreements that the promoters will do some things to help fund a local authority or county doing something which is... the idea has come up because of the existence of the railway. One of the impressive things about today's presentation, one of the many impressive things about today's presentations, is the concept of the local area hosting the railway and looking for things that can be done which will meet local needs as well as accepting the needs of the railway itself. But this may not be the right time of day to go into it in any detail. I think we can probably expect, whatever the result, that the promoter and the Secretary of State would, for example, over footpaths, think whether some initiative is worthwhile in trying to say, can there be benefits to walkers as well as to passengers on the railway from the railway going through so many of them. Now may not be the right time to look too closely at A106215, where there may be a reason for the footpath designed by an engineer, so it's got 3 straight lines going further out. And the red line, for example, is, I think, 20 to 25% shorter than the yellow line. And almost whatever way you want to get to a place across the railway, that would say. So, and that's just a minor modification. Yeah. The major issue I'm after is on footpaths and similar kinds of things, using Colne Valley as an illustrative example, perhaps one of the most important ones, whether the promoters and the Secretary will reflect on some of the points that have been made by the petitioners today, or those representing them, and other places, and see whether an initiative, whether within the bill or around it, would be possible and worthwhile.
I've no doubt, but I wouldn't want to... One sometimes feels that those things that the promoter is already saying that he will do somehow get lost in the mix. And Mr. Miller showed you that very early draft of the restoration mitigation plan. That process will I have no doubt at all, involve consideration, amongst other things, of the fine-tuning of arrangements for public rights of way and so forth, which are affected by the bill. And whilst this looks like it might have been drawn by an engineer, and I can't say whether it was or not, what I can say is that whether the engineers like it or not, they're going to have to sit down with the environmentalists and the others within the company, as well as those who will participate, we hope, in the Colne Valley panel, to balance the engineering needs of the railway, which are important, with the environmental effects that it has. And no one doubts, if I can just finish with this, no one doubts, least of all the promoter, that that if we are to maintain a surface route through the Colne Valley, which we say we should, that it will involve very extensive construction works, and the permanent impacts will be of some substance. And therefore, we are very much alive to need to focus attention on a coherent response to that. And that is what some of the materials we've shown you today is designed to take forward.
Okay, thank you. Brief final comments?
Yes, I think I must have missed the answer earlier on. I think, in principle, we welcome the idea of the Colne Valley panel, because as long as its objectives are similar to ours, obviously. But can we have an assurance that HS2 will fund it, please? Because we're a very poor company, and we would like some funding allocated to it.
An assurance has been put forward that the reasonable administrative costs for the panel will be met by the nominated undertaker. Yeah.
If I could come in there and say that I think that falls short of what's required here, because the key outcome from that panel is the ability for the principal output would be that we can use local knowledge to bring some site-specific proposals for the key locations that could be brought forward that include landowner consents, costings, funding opportunity and delivery mechanisms. And we need time to work those up. I talked on about some of the issues of alternative sites for woodland planting, or restoration plans, for instance, for the Hoack Lake, or some of these footpath proposals, the extensions of the footpaths that could be, we just need the time and effort to bring that up. When we have these bilateral meetings with High Speed 2, we have been asked, so what do you need? Give us specific examples. And as Richard said, a very poor company, we simply do not have the resources to do that. We have the will, we have the knowledge, we have the ability, we have the connections.
We have made some suggestions, and I think we're awaiting a response from HS2.
Clearly the panel's a starting point, but and they might well wish to commission you or others to do work, but I think we're finished tonight. You've made your case, you've made some important points, and I think it gives us some further things to think about. So, order. If you could clear the room and give my committee a chance just to have 5 minutes chat before we disappear to the dining room.